My name is Souza. I'm here in the Oregon State, and I'm here to talk about corruption in government and what I call judicial murder. I understand that this little clip here is going to be presented to you gentlemen in Congress here. And so one thing that I would like to point out at this point, with all the horror stories in this country, across this nation, in all these local empires that we call counties, I don't know how you people can stand there and continue to let this thing happen. The bottom line is, it's like the song goes, how many times can a man turn his head and pretend not to see? On top of that, one other thing I would like to add with this thing is whether you believe in the Creator or not is irrelevant, because right now I can tell you one thing that no one can deny, that the universal laws work with mathematical precision without fail, and the time is coming that all of the people out there that have been creating these atrocities in this country, in our so-called just us system, their day's coming and they will have to answer the call. My story is about my dad that was kidnapped from the hospital, taken to a facility where he had died a week later. I did not find out that he died till 2 weeks later, and that was on my own volition and my own research and my own investigation. This was all done, from what I understand, it's called separate, isolate, medicate, and get the estate. I've heard this acronym or this cliche many times in the past, but you just don't realize the real meaning behind these type of things until it happens to you, and it did happen to me. So I guess the bottom line is I think this whole industry called guardianship, protecting older people, children, and so forth. It may be a great program because there are people that do get abused, and this is understandable, but this is an industry that has completely gotten out of control and overboard. It is all about generating revenue, money, no matter who they destroy, who they hurt, who they kill, who they do what. This is what happened to my dad when he was in the hospital. And like I say, he died a week later after they got a hold of him. And I always promised my dad that I would never put him in an institution, and he would always stay at home. And here he is, kidnapped, taken to a strange facility where he dies by himself, alone. Not one word about it, no calls, no paperwork, no nothing. He was just ripped out of our house and ripped out of the hospital at the time he was in there. I never believed these kind of things could happen, but now I do believe it. I used to have trust and faith in some kind of justice, but we realize now that throughout this whole country, it's called the just us system. We have men, women that have morphed their ways into positions of power. As the quote goes, absolute power definitely does corrupt, and we see this every single day in what people call courtrooms. I refer to dens of corruption, because that's exactly what they are. We have men in black robes, women in black robes. We have those in suits and ties, those with guns and badges that are under the color of law, disguised behind respectability, that are doing nothing but destroying people's lives, families' lives, and they're even killing people, and they're walking and they're getting away with this. This is so far over the top. The only way I could reference to this, the things that are going on, is I call it like living in the Twilight Zone on steroids. My story starts real quick, where I guess it was, I won't get in any dates per se right now, but this all happened last year. My parents were living on the family farm. For quite a long time, I tried to convince them to come and live with us because they were getting at an age where they weren't able to take care of themselves. My mother spent the last couple of years taking care of my dad. He's actually my stepdad, but he was my stepdad since I was 10 years old. So he was just like my dad, in any case. Finally, my parents came to their senses. They moved out of the farmhouse and they moved in with us. I took care of my mother for the first couple of years until she had died. She died from congestive heart failure. She died in the hospital. After her death, I continued to take care of my dad. And like I said, I told him that I would never put him in a facility, that he would stay with us until the day he died. And so for the next 3 years, that's what I did. I probably, had to discount a lot of my business and everything, because taking care of an individual or another person, it takes a lot of energy and time in that. But during the time that I took care of my dad, there's probably been 2 or 3 times when he would develop a high fever, and I would get him to the hospital, because usually they were pretty good at kind of getting getting a handle on these type of conditions. In that, we had a house nurse that would come in at least twice a week, take all his vital signs, clear him up, check him out, make sure he was doing okay. And it was one day when, I guess it was a couple of days, he started taking a turn for the worse. He wasn't eating much, didn't want to eat much. He started losing some weight, but he developed a fever, and I knew it was probably because of a urinary infection that he developed. So I called the paramedics. They came up, they took him to the hospital. The usual routine is he'd be in the hospital for maybe a week at tops, and then he'd be put in a rehab center for a couple of weeks to build his strength back up, and then I'd bring him back home. Well, it was that time when they took him. I think it was on a Tuesday. I went in. He was sitting up, ready to eat lunch. He was pretty congruent at that time. I went in and fed him lunch. I explained to him what was going on. I told him the doctors would probably discharge him by the end of the week. I was making arrangements to have him sent off to a rehab facility where he'd been once before, and it was where his home nurse was working out of too, and he was familiar with the area. And I wanted to let him know for sure that, this is where he was going to be for about a week or so until his strength got built back up. And when he was in these kind of situations, I'd go in on a daily basis and, visit him to make sure that he felt comfortable and that he knew that no one was just going to leave him, And so after I fed him that day, I went home. And they were making arrangements. Friday rolled around, and they were making arrangements for Friday to have him shipped to this other facility. So I was waiting on the phone for a call from the hospital, because they were going to let me know when they were going to come and transfer him over there, and I wanted to be with him at that time. And that I got the phone call. I was thinking it was a hospital, but it was the Yamhill County Sheriff's Department. Detective Kevin Gardner, who had called me. And he asked me about my dad. And then the next thing I know, he's telling me that I have been accused of abuse. And I just kind of fell out of my chair at that point. Obviously these things shock you to death. What? He asked if he could come over and talk to me. I figured, well, I had nothing to hide. I usually don't talk to these people because, like they say, anything you say can and will be used you in a den of corruption. But I figured, well, okay, I had nothing to hide. There was nothing wrong here. I had him come over, and after talking to him for a few minutes on the subject, I got a good feeling from him. I thought this man would probably be really honest and straightforward. So I invited him in the house. I showed him the facilities that we were living in, the place where my dad was being taken care of in his room. We gave him access to medical reports and everything else. And he told me at that time, he says, well, as far as he can see, everything looks up to snuff and everything looks okay to him. And he reassured me at that time where he thought that this would blow over in a few days once he gets his report in. Okay, well, after he had finally left, I got another phone call. Well, this phone call came from a woman. Her name was Sherry O'Harlan. Well, she happened to be part of this guardianship corporation, and she told me that she was taking over my dad, his life, and they were taking everything. This all happened in one day. They closed out our bank accounts. They stole the money out of our bank accounts. They diverted his mail to wherever, and they took him to another facility. At that time, I tried to get a hold of an attorney. I didn't know enough at that time, otherwise I probably would have run it pretty much on my own. But I knew where they had taken him. They wouldn't tell me anything. They said I had to talk to the guardian. And I didn't want to get involved with talking to anybody till I got an attorney, because like I was always told, what you say can and will be used. And we know how these people can distort things that you say. I've had prosecutors tell me that they could prosecute a ham sandwich if they wanted to. So I was trying to make contact with one attorney to open the door to find out about getting my dad back or getting him out of there. During this process, for the first week that went through, I was calling pretty much almost every day to see how my dad was. They wouldn't tell me anything. They kept telling me I had to call this other person to find out anything. So I remember when I did call, a couple times I did call, my dad had already died, and they still wouldn't tell me. They said they won't tell me anything. I have to get a hold of this one person. And another week went by, and I believe I found out from one attorney that called me, and she told me 9 days later, she said, "Did you know that your dad apparently died?" And I said, "What?" Well, no calls, no nothing. I started researching myself and made a bunch of calls and found out where my dad was at. His body was down at a funeral hall that's been there for 2 weeks. My dad was there. Even when I went down to this funeral place to find out what was going on, even the people there were just kind of stunned, and they didn't know what was going on. And I sent them a letter. I said, no matter what, that don't touch my dad, don't do anything to him, cremate him or anything, and that. They said, well, we have to go along with the guardianship. Well, it turned out that they did cremate him to begin with. I wanted to do an autopsy and research on this to prove what was going on, but they covered up the evidence, of course. This was all signed, from what I understand, by AHO, Administrative Hearing Officer. I believe his name is John Collins in Yamhill County. I know this man somewhat. I know the atrocities that he's basically committed against other people, like most of them do, and that. And it's just blown me away how no due process, no nothing. It seems to me that if anybody had any suspicions of any abuse or anything wrongdoing, that you would call the individual and you would sit down and go over the facts and determine what's going on here. And if they figured that it was something more serious, then you take it to the next level. That did not even happen at all. It was all of a sudden, bam, they take my dad away, they close out our account, they steal our bank account, they take our money from us. And I went down and got the police report. It turned out to be moderately really good. Kevin wrote up a good report. He said, hey man, everything looked great to him, and as far as he could tell, everything was cool and stuff and that, and but this was a still ongoing thing. So in the long run, that's what it basically boiled down to. Here's a man that gives somebody else the authority to go in and kidnap a family member to make more money or generate more revenue. I could probably write a book on these things. I got tons of stories about the abuse in these type of systems, but the thing about it is these are things that need to be addressed. These are things that need to be taken care of, because it's hard to imagine the crimes that are being committed by these people in positions of authority. It's hard to imagine the things that they'll do and the atrocities that they will commit for their own sick, twisted personal gains. I'm trying to, so I guess the bottom line of my story is my dad was kidnapped from the hospital. I haven't even seen any legal papers on this. I haven't even seen any papers from a signed judge or anything of this nature. Nothing was presented to me except this detective coming out and talking to me, and the rest was pretty much history. My dad has already been buried. After 2 months after he had died, they finally arranged it to have him buried. I had another attorney at that time that even told me that if I didn't do this or this or this, they were coming after me. Well, the prosecutor even made a statement in the report that said that there wasn't any evidence or enough evidence in their report to convict me or anybody of any kind of abuse of any. Obviously, there wasn't anything there. And that, but these criminals have still gotten away what they did. this is why I've termed this judicial murder. When you have a man in a black robe that can sign a piece of paper to give another individual or a corporation or somebody else to go in and usurp a family, steal a family member, and kidnap them, and a week later they turn up dead, and the family's not even notified at all, something's wrong with this picture, big time. And like I say, my story probably isn't as horrific as some of the others I've heard, but still, these people need to be held accountable. They're just getting away with murder, and they're doing it under the color of law disguised in respectability. And these people are nothing but criminals, and they're thugs. And they have their drones with guns and badges to enforce their laws, whatever they want. And I've always said, like the quote says, it's almost impossible to show anyone the truth when their paychecks depend on them not knowing the truth. And I see this a lot with a lot of these men out there with guns and badges. These men have been sanctioned, they have been condoned, and they have total immunity to do whatever they want to people. They can literally go out and murder people and walk the next day. And if you think I'm shucking and jive, I could pull up thousands of reports and videos of the violence and the criminals that these men really are. And some of them, I'm not saying they're all criminals, but many of them will not speak up or stop because they're jeopardizing their own jobs, they're jeopardizing their own paychecks as well, and that they're stuck between a rock and a hard spot. But the time has come, and I do believe that this year is going to be the time that these people are going to be held accountable, and things have got to change. You people in Congress, I don't know what, I don't know if you want to really hear what I have to say about a lot of things and that. But you want to know why the people are in the position they're in and the trust that they have with the so-called government? People call this a government. I don't see it as a government at all. I look at it as a corporate fascist regime controlled by a dictator. And that's exactly what it is. So I think everybody needs to start waking up to the reality of the truth of what's going on in this world, and especially in this part of the world we call the land of the free. When we have our men that go over and fight illegal wars and kill other people for the justice and the criminals that are running everything. And when we think we're fighting for freedom, give me a break. It ain't got nothing to do with any freedom for any country. It has to do with generating revenue for the criminals of this world and the financial banksters of this world and that. But anyway, I don't want to get too far off the track. But bottom line is, I think the last assault on me was after my dad had died and been buried, after they have diverted all my dad's mail to somewhere else. I end up getting his mail back in our box again. And I got a piece of mail from this attorney's office that was on the side of the guardianship. It had a bill in it from Verizon for $39, a phone bill, which I had already paid, but they had sent it to me. And obviously the thing I think, well, they took over all his life and his finances and that. I thought they were going to pay all his bills apparently and everything else. And here they send me a $39 phone bill that wasn't paid in my dad's name. I mean, it's absolutely madness and absolutely insane, and it's just Twilight Zone on steroids. And that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.